Welcome to The Explainer. I'm absolutely thrilled to have you here today because honestly, we are looking at something truly fascinating. We spend so much time mapping out the known world, completely relying on science and logic to explain our environment. But today, we're going to explore three heavily documented source accounts where the ocean just completely defies all logic. We're talking about encounters where the physical evidence remains, but the rational explanations entirely fall apart.
So what happens when the rational rules of the ocean suddenly stop applying? We actually aren't going to look at a traditional agenda today. Instead, we're plunging straight into the uncanny. These accounts take us on a sort of descent, starting from the surface of the water, moving to the shoreline, and finally plunging into the crushing depths. Okay, let's dive into this.
Section 1, The Night Swimmer's Trap, a Jersey Shore Anomaly.
It starts innocently enough, right? A college student doing a remote internship decides to take a solo dip in the ocean to just kind of clear their head. Because hey, what's more relaxing than a pitch-black swim in open water? But the time is absolutely crucial here. It is 10 p.m. on a random weeknight. The beach town is completely dead, the streets are totally empty. The narrator wades in and swims out about 50 yards from the shore. The water is calm, the sky is clear, and they're just floating on their backs, safely stargazing. There's this deep, albeit incredibly false, sense of security in that total isolation. Then, suddenly, the tranquil silence is completely shattered. Out of nowhere, a young woman's voice screams, "Help me! Help me!" The narrator hears violent, desperate splashing, the unmistakable, helpless thrashing of someone actually drowning. But the sound isn't coming from the beach. It's coming from much further out in the open ocean. Convinced someone is literally moments away from dying, the narrator is drawn into the sheer, almost trance-like pursuit, swimming frantically into the pitch dark to save her. The pacing of this encounter is terrifying. At minute 0, they're floating peacefully. By minute 5, the screams start. For the next 10 minutes, the narrator is swimming at a competitive pace into open water, completely fixated. But the thing is, no matter how fast they swim, the screaming woman never sounds any closer. Then, at minute 20, they hit this invisible line where the water temperature suddenly plummets. This massive shock of freezing water snaps the swimmer right out of their trance. They look back and realize the beach has become this tiny, unrecognizable strip of sand. And then, at minute 25, the screaming abruptly stops. Dead silence. And something grabs them. Now, you might be wondering, was this just a wild panic attack? Well, the undeniable physical aftermath proved otherwise. The swimmer felt something exactly like a rope or cord tightly wrap around their ankle, violently yanking them completely underwater. After miraculously breaking free and practically crawling onto the sand, the physical evidence was right there on their body. They had this dark greenish band wrapped entirely around their ankle. And it wasn't a bruise, it was a clean, unbroken line that looked almost like a stain. And despite aggressive scrubbing, that eerie green mark didn't fade for 2 whole days.
Section 2, The Beach Campground Anomaly, the erratic green light.
So picture this. It's October, and 2 friends in their mid-20s, the narrator and his friend Peter, are camping overnight on a secluded residential stretch of the beach. After dark, sitting by a small fire, they spot something bizarre over the water. Unlike a normal ship's light, which drifts steadily across the horizon and is usually white or amber, the erratic light they watched was distinctly green. And it wasn't drifting, it was teleporting. It was literally skipping and glitching instantly from spot to spot across the sky, completely silent, before it began moving in these dancing circular patterns right toward them.
As it got closer, gaining actual depth and dimension, it didn't just slowly fade away like you'd expect. The light just abruptly clicked off. Vanished. Understandably super unsettled, the 2 friends zipped themselves tightly into their tent, completely unaware of the terrifying reality of what was actually happening just inches from their heads while they slept. Because the true horror wasn't the light up in the sky, it was what they found at sunrise. When Peter shakes his friend awake at dawn, they step out to find a near-perfect circular trench dug completely around their tent, with just 3 or 4 feet of clearance. And the dimensions were eerily uniform, exactly 6 inches deep and a foot across. Looking further down the beach, they found dozens of irregularly spaced holes that honestly would have taken hours to dig. But the most unsettling detail of the whole thing? The sand inside those holes was subtly but very distinctly tinted green. Someone or something had silently excavated the beach within arm's reach of them.
Whatever the light was, whatever the holes were, and whatever had turned the sand green, it all happened while we were lying right there.
I mean, the sheer vulnerability of that realization is just astounding. It leaves us with this lingering dread as we prepare to descend into our third and deepest anomaly.
Section 3, the Deep Sea Hallucination, Roatan, Honduras, 2016.
For this one, we're following two highly experienced divers, the narrator and his buddy, Ryan. They both have around 80 logged dives, and they're exploring this massive, rusted cargo wreck. The dive master gave them super strict instructions to stay above 100 feet. But drawn by an opening in the cargo hatch, the divers push past the safety limits, descending all the way to 134 feet. At this depth, they are rapidly burning through their air supply. But they don't even care, because they become completely and utterly mesmerized by something resting on the rusted deck. Sitting right there on the metal plates was something entirely unnatural. The narrator describes it as a basketball-sized object that looked kind of like a jellyfish, but with serious texture, folds and ridges almost like the surface of a human brain. It was swaying delicately, but the most captivating, downright bizarre detail was its color. Down on this sunken, decaying wreck, it was emitting a brilliant, screaming fluorescent yellow, acting like a tiny little light source in the pitch-dark water. But here is where the laws of physics just completely break down. As the source states, if you've ever been below 100 feet, you know that color doesn't exist down there. At 130 feet, the ocean water filters out all warm light. Everything turns washed out blue and green. If you held a bright red marble in front of your mask at that depth, it would just look gray. So emitting a screaming fluorescent yellow is, according to the literal laws of physics, completely impossible. Look at how wildly fast this escalates. First, there's total fixation. Both divers just totally zone out, circling the object in a daze. Second, they suffer a severe loss of time awareness, burning through almost 30 minutes at extreme depth. Third, reality finally crashes back in when their dive computers start screaming emergency alarms at them. Their air tanks are practically empty. We're talking emergency levels of 600 psi, which is barely enough to take a breath. Step 4 is a panicked, dangerously rapid ascent back to the surface, which ends up resulting in agonizing decompression sickness, better known as the bends. So later that night, while recovering in their hotel room, Ryan suddenly remembers he recorded the entire dive on his GoPro. They eagerly pull up the footage to look at this impossible yellow jellyfish. But there was no yellow glow. For 8.5 straight minutes, the footage showed the two divers slowly circling a completely bare, empty patch of rusted metal. There was absolutely nothing there. Section 4, Explaining the Unexplainable, the Rational versus the Impossible. Let's systematically break down the rational explanations provided in our source material and see exactly why they ultimately fall short. Starting with our first story of the night swimmer, the most common rationalization folks jump to is an elaborate prank or a trap. But let's contrast that against the impossible logistics. The likelihood that someone could reasonably expect a solitary victim to be swimming 50 yards out into the open ocean on a random weeknight at 10 p.m. is practically zero. The logistics of coordinating a fake drowning to lure one specific person out at that exact unpredictable moment simply do not make sense. I mean, unless they had a crystal ball. Moving to the second story, the narrator actually heavily researched natural explanations: bioluminescence, tidal phenomena, military flares, changes in sand composition. But honestly, none of these explain the campground reality. A tide doesn't dig an eerily uniform 6-inch deep circular trench perfectly around a specific tent. Natural phenomena certainly don't leave dozens of irregularly spaced deep holes filled with green-tinted sand while two people sleep soundly just inches away. Now, for our deep-sea divers, there is actually an established medical explanation: nitrogen narcosis, which is often called the martini effect. When diving deep on compressed air, excess nitrogen literally alters your consciousness. It causes impaired judgment, euphoria, massive fixation, and yes, even visual hallucinations. On paper, this seems to wrap up the mystery neatly. It perfectly explains why they zoned out and saw something that wasn't on the GoPro, right? But wait, here is the massive, undeniable flaw in that logic. Nitrogen narcosis is strictly an individual response. Two divers at the exact same depth will experience totally different symptoms. One might totally panic while the other feels intense euphoria. Yet, when the narrator and Ryan independently described what they saw, their accounts matched perfectly. They both hallucinated the exact same screaming fluorescent yellow color, the exact same basketball size, and the exact same brain-like membrane ridges. Science literally has zero documented precedent for identical shared visual hallucinations.
None. Which leaves us with this final, really unsettling thought. If medical science can explain the hallucinating mind, but completely fails to explain how two individual minds could independently share the exact same impossible vision, what exactly is waiting for us in the darkest depths? From invisible traps, to perfectly carved trenches, to glowing objects that don't even exist yet captivate us all the same, the ocean definitely keeps its secrets. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning everything, and I'll catch you next time.